For adults, I think so much of it is self-perception or how you will be perceived by others once you take your risk. I think that's really tough because even for me, I got really set in like my identity, and I've always identified as an adult as a teacher. Like that's who I am.
Mhm.
And moving into another world, being publishing, I'm like, am I an author? Like who am I? Is this my space to be in? And I think when you start to like self-doubt, it makes it really hard for you to maintain focus on what was the initial dream that you had all along. Because I think when you set your dream and then you start moving towards it, there's all these little things that distract you. Like, well, I know I need to do this, but people will think of me a certain way, so I better do it this way. When in reality, maybe that initial thought is just what you should be doing the whole time.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Kooler Radio, the broadcast that hosts conversations that can help you craft your life. Each week, we bring on guests who are influencers, coaches, mentors, leaders, and our conversations explore the art of intentional living in crafting life to your dreams. Drop in with us now and get ready to craft your life. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Kooler Radio. I'm your host, Matt Kuehlhorn. Today, I have a very cool guest, Matt Eicheldinger. In less than 1 year, Matt has gone from classroom teacher to New York Times bestselling author, public figure, and keynote speaker. I've heard him referenced as the most widely known teacher on Instagram. His successful books and viral social media videos have sent Eicheldinger across the country on numerous author visits and speaking tours, with 4 more books set to release in the next year, including the highly anticipated Sticky Notes, Memorable Lessons from Ordinary Moments. It seems inevitable that Eicheldinger will be one of the most popular authors and speakers of 2024, 2025, and beyond. Matt is currently on leave from teaching as he continues to promote his books and write future projects. Matt, welcome.
Thank you, man. Hearing my bio makes me sound impressive. I don't,
Right?
maybe I should have someone rewrite that. I hope I live up to the expectations. I was like, dang, that's a lot. Jeez.
So far, we've had a fun, just even pre-recording conversation, Matt, and I'm excited to get to know you and your story. And I will say, one of the things that really has impressed me in just my research and prep for this is your humility.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. Let's start kind of how I always open these up. Where did you grow up?
So I was born in New York, but I was raised in Montrose, Colorado. I think we moved there when I was 3 and graduated from Montrose High School, 2005, not to date myself.
Yeah.
And came to college in Minnesota, which is where I currently live. So
Awesome.
I like to say I'm a Colorado boy at heart. Like I miss the mountains. Minnesota is beautiful, but I grew up in elevation, and that's where a lot of my memories come from.
What was growing up for you like in Montrose? I mean, this was late 90s?
Yeah,
Early 2000s?
late 90s. Yep. So my parents moved there from New York because a new like manufacturing company opened. It was called Gidco Industrial Diamond. My dad was the manager, and it was just a really small town feel. Like I remember when like the second grocery store was built, it was like a big deal. Like everyone was like, well, do I go to the old one or the new one? And I have memories of riding my bike. We grew up kind of outside of town. I'd ride my bike all the way in town to go to the one Dairy Queen, the one place you could get ice cream with my family. And I loved having so many friends too that were farmers. I think early on they knew I'm just taking over the family farm. And it wasn't that they didn't care about school, but they always had a sense of adventure. Like I was going to farms, I was helping bale hay, I was going to get lost in surrounding forests. It was just a great place to grow up. And like the typical 90s was like, your parents kick you outside. Like no one had to kick me outside. Like I just wanted to go. And to be, a 15-minute drive from going up into the mountains, unreal. Like I didn't take it for granted, but as an adult now with children who I try and get them outside into nature all the time, I just think how lucky I was to be in a place where I could do that. Just truly incredible.
Yeah. I love that. My family moved me when I was 11 from Chicago to a small town up in Michigan, Traverse City. And it was almost overnight freedom. And so I just, when you're talking about like the freedom of adventure in the small town, like that is special.
Yeah, it was. And we were pretty we were embedded pretty good in the community. My mom opened the first dance studio on the Western Slope. And
That's
so that
awesome.
attracted not a lot of attention to our family, but we just got to meet so many people because my mom had hundreds of dance students. I took dance as well. And it was right across the street from Montrose High School, basically. So all my friends knew where I was all the time. They would walk in and say hello. And it was just a really cool atmosphere.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
How did you get into teaching? So you graduated Montrose High School.
Yeah.
What's the summary that brought you into Minnesota and into education specifically?
Sure. So up until I think it was it must have been just a month or two before I graduated, I was set on being an architect.
Really?
My track coach at the time, who I'll come back to in a second, he was our AutoCAD drafting instructor. And so I could draw half decent, and I knew architects made decent money. So I was like, oh, I guess I'll do that. Didn't really have a passion. It was just this is what adults do,
Yeah.
And so my parents even bought me, we never owned a laptop computer. They bought me a laptop computer for college. But we run this soccer camp every summer with the high school. And the first, I guess it was in summer or pre-summer, we started running this soccer camp. And I always got put with what we called the bumblebees. It was the little tiny toddlers that just ran around crazy.
All right. Yeah.
And I was in the middle of that camp and I was like, I think I should be a teacher. This seems like something I'm really good at and other people think I'm good at it. So maybe I should do what I'm naturally gifted at. And when I say gifted, I just mean connecting with kids. I don't have to work hard at that. It's probably because I just have a flexibility of maturity. I can be 8 or I can be 37, whatever I need to be in the moment.
Yeah.
And so I also had really being in a small town, you see your teachers everywhere, right? So I had many of the teachers I had went to my church. They helped in after school programs. Some were my coaches. And so it always felt to me oh, this is what teaching is. It's all about people. It's all about continuing to connect with these individuals. And so then I had to decide where to go. And 2 of the choices, believe it or not, one was in Western State in Gunnison. That was one of my choices I was going to go. And the other was the second coldest place on earth, which is St. Paul, Minnesota. I don't know why I chose the coldest places to go to college. I ended up choosing the one that would give me more of a scholarship for track. So I came out to Minnesota on a track scholarship and went to Concordia St. Paul and just had a great experience, and then got my first job out of college. And here I am, married with 2 kids. We talked about maybe getting back to Colorado early on in our marriage, but we've got roots here now. And so I think we'll be sticking around here for a while. But teaching really just became an identity too. It's I love walking around saying I'm a teacher, and there's not a lot of males in education, and so I always found it kind of like a badge I was wearing. Oh yeah, I'm a teacher. It was like a firefighter or police officer in my mind. It's I'm in it.
Yeah.
And it just felt great.
I love that. I can definitely feel and see your passion. And I think one of the coolest things that I learned when preparing for this conversation, because I hadn't met you before now, but the component of storytelling that you brought into the classroom.
Yeah.
Was this something that you had because of your childhood, your upbringing, that freedom, or was this something that you have crafted over time in being an educator?
That's a great question. No one's ever asked me that, of why I use storytelling as a kind of the medium for education. And so really it came out of not knowing how to have a thing. When I became a teacher, all my colleagues had things. One was the dancing teacher, another teacher was the dad joke teacher. And I was well, I want a thing to be known for. And I just happened to have a really good memory of my childhood. And the reason I think that is my parents told me stories all the time. When I was younger about me being the hero, they were all made up. And I think it didn't force me to, but I think I viewed my life in third person often. I was watching myself go through life. And even when I would come back home, one of the main characters in my middle grade series, I've been drawing that character since I was in 3rd grade. So I would draw that character doing things I wish I would have done or could have done. If I missed the winning goal, I would draw myself actually making it. Or if I was teased, I would draw myself with friends. It was like, I don't want to use the word therapy, but I can't think of anything else. It's kind of just like self-therapy. And when I brought that into my classroom, kids latched onto that stuff right away, those memories from childhood. And I think it's because I'm not telling stories that are far-fetched and like kids would never see themselves in it. It's like I'm telling these embarrassing moments from my childhood that kids latched onto. And they're like, oh, tell us more of that. And that's ultimately what helped me craft my first middle grade series is my childhood. And then there's also the part of me that just collected stories too from teaching, which is probably what you saw on Instagram. That's most of what I do. And that I was doing in tangent with telling kids stories. So I'm like telling stories from my childhood, but I'm also watching these kids every day, trying to remember like, what do I want to walk away with every day?
That's amazing.
And so there's these two parallel things happening at the same time, but there was never like an intention early on to start Instagram or tell stories. It just kind of happened naturally.
Yeah, something in that, Matt, is pretty special because I'm a believer of envisioning what we want. I think that's one of the ways of communicating with our subconscious. And through your upbringing and who you are, you just shared how you're naturally doing this, but also in illustration. So you're moving it through your body, you're putting it into pen and pencil, and that's fascinating.
Yeah, what I like about my story, and thank you for the compliment, by the way. What I like about my story is that my goals have changed over time too. Like when I started telling kids these stories, the goal was to engage my students, to have a connection, to find something common that we could all laugh about, right? Kids always crave for something common because when you have a common experience, then everyone can talk about it, right? If I'm talking about, I don't own a cabin up north, but if I were talking about a cabin I owned up north in Minnesota, a lot of kids can't relate to that.
Yeah.
And so to tell a story, it grounds everyone in that central idea. And so that was my first goal. And then my second goal was, it'd be cool to put this in my classroom, like print out these stories. And then when I saw kids enjoyed reading it, then the goal switched again to, I want to write a book. But again, this is all happening when I'm 21. I think the great thing about dream chasing when you're so young is you can't compare it to anything. And so your idea of failure, you don't even really see because you're so caught up in the excitement of wanting to do what your dream is. And at the time, my dream was I want to get a book on the shelf. I didn't know what that meant, how to do it, the longevity, payment. I knew nothing, but I was like, I feel like this is what I'm supposed to do. And that same feeling came out with these Instagram stories of stories from teaching. When I collected stories over decades, I didn't have a plan to someday start an Instagram account and like share them all. It came out of me being on leave from teaching. And I wanted to tell people what it is teachers do, but not politicize it and just like put a story on a plate and say, here's what happened. And then you can take from it what you want. And so I think for anyone chasing a dream or starting a business, and I'm sure you went through this too with starting your company, is so much of that process is learning about yourself. It's not so much learning about what you need to go do. It's like, this is a new space for me. How do I navigate it? What are my expectations for myself? What are my morals and values navigating this? Like that's been interesting too, to tackle as you grow in popularity or notoriety. Like, who am I? And who do I want to be? And who do I want my kids to see 10 years from now? Like you've got videos online. I've got videos online. What do I want my kids to see of me when I'm older? And so those things help guide me as I move forward for sure.
Yeah. Amazing. I was going to ask about your perspective, and I'm seeing if it comes back because you were sharing about having these dreams and not really knowing the pathway for it. In your experience, having worked with numerous students, and I haven't really drilled into your age group, but I'm assuming the primary is a middle school student.
Yep.
Now, do you see it where your students or even other people in your network would have these dreams and just like hold back? like maybe somebody wouldn't start that Instagram piece, even though they're feeling an internal, like, I want to do something.
Yeah.
But there's a hold back.
Yep.
And yet you're able to move through that hold back in your own life.
I think there's a couple reasons, and maybe I'll section it off into students and adults, right?
Fair.
I think the first thing I want to make really clear is I think many people who might look at my storyline, because Instagram didn't come first, right? That's later. Like book deals came first and then Instagram. But I think a lot of people would hear my story maybe at face value and think like, oh, Matt just grinded away at this. Like, what a story of perseverance. And it is that, but maybe even more so, it's a story of support. I had so much support along the way, encouraging people, my wife, and you know, you can't discount that when you're chasing a dream. And so the first thing I think about when I think of kids and they have a goal is what kind of support they have, because I really do feel like that is a big determination of success, right? If you're a kid and you're growing up in a household that doesn't value what you're doing or what you're trying to accomplish, it's going to be really hard for you in your adolescent brain to want to continue doing that. And so when I look at kids, I think an easy example is kids who love to draw. And there's so many that I've had over the years. And some kids do it as work avoidance, right? It's like, I'm an artist, so I'm going to do this. It's like, well, you also haven't turned anything in ever. You know? So there's those students who are work avoidant, but then there's students that you see just have this innate passion for art. And when you see them so honed in and excited about it, that gets me excited. And why would you not want to support a kid who's all in for that? And I think sports are a little bit different. Like, I understand as a parent wanting to help your child pursue a dream of sports, but there's something about an art form that really captivates me, because I feel like that's coming from like this internal place, right? It's creativity. And I don't want to get into like, is creativity athleticism and all that. I'm not making a statement or anything like that. I'm just saying I understand where that kid is coming from. And so I think of support when I think of how do you move past it. It's you got to have people cheering you on. For adults, I think so much of it is self-perception, or how you will be perceived by others once you take your risk. I think that's really tough, because even for me, I got really set in like my identity, and I've always identified as an adult as a teacher. Like, that's who I am. And moving into another world, being at publishing, I'm like, am I an author? Like, who am I? Is this my space to be in? And I think when you start to like self-doubt, it makes it really hard for you to maintain focus on what was the initial dream that you had all along. Because I think when you set your dream and then you start moving towards it, there's all these little things that distract you. Like, well, I know I need to do this, but people will think of me a certain way, so I better do it this way. When in reality, maybe that initial thought is just what you should be doing the whole time. And I think it can hurt too when you fail as an adult. I think maybe more so than a kid. And I wonder if that's because you're wondering about how everyone else will perceive that failure. Rather than when you're a kid, you usually just hop right back on the horse. You don't know any different, you know?
Right. Yeah.
So when I've met with adults who are pursuing publication, because that's usually why people reach out to me, sometimes they'll ask how to start an Instagram account. I usually start by saying, like, you have nothing to lose with trying to go into publishing or Instagram. You have nothing to lose. All you have to do is be your authentic self, and your audience will come, because that's what it is to be a human. It's to find people to connect with, and there is someone to connect with you out there. And sometimes it just takes a little time. It takes time for you to be genuine. I think to let some of those walls fall down that maybe you've been holding up as you pursue a dream. But ultimately, I think that's what makes dreams a reality, is when you have this genuine want to do something that you feel in your soul, and you don't worry about how others will think of you as you chase it. That's my TED Talk.
That's good. No, I don't know. I can't wait for that one.
No, geez. And you know, like, who knows, like a week from now, I might say something different, but that's currently how I've been feeling now is I've received a lot of support. And from the outside looking in, it may seem that I've done this all on my own, but it's definitely not. Yeah. I'm sure you've experienced this too, starting a business. Like you
Absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely. I think the support is huge. And I think what has really given me momentum, and I'd reflect this question back to you, Matt, but in my own intentionality of my network and choosing who I'm running with, choosing who I'm hanging out with. And that's
Yeah.
part of you bringing employees is a little bit of that. Like I need to be very specific on who joins a Kooler team, and there's an intentionality to it. But even beyond that, I remember getting into a group of business owners and it made me nervous, and I knew it was an opportunity to grow. That's also where I'm finding support. And that support piece is huge, right? So in your journey, have you been intentional, or at what level of intentionality have you gone about building that network to have that support?
That's a really good question. Definitely haven't been asked that one before. I am lucky in that I have a good base. So my family and my friends are just kind of there. So my base is really strong. I guess the easiest thing for me to think about for that question is I'm still meeting other authors. Like when I came into this and published my first book, I only knew like a couple authors who self-published, because that's originally what I did. Is I didn't just get picked up. Like I self-published my book because I believed in my ideas so much, and that's ultimately what helped me get noticed. And it's in that journey that I met some people, and man, those people have been helpful. Partly because I think they all understand the grind of making a book, like just like you and your business collective, what those people all understand to start a business. And so there's some commonality there, but I'll never forget this author named Nina Hamza. She is a middle grade author in the Twin Cities area. When I was self-published, I reached out to her. She had a Minnesota Book of the Year finalist, and I just cold emailed her, and I was like, you don't know me. I'm a teacher in the cities. I've made this book. Would you be willing to meet with me and just talk to me about your journey and how you got published? And she did. She did. And like in hindsight, like that's to me, that was so crazy that that person would be willing just to like help me for no reason other than to help. And so when I think about like building my support network, I've just been very lucky in that people have been willing to help. And so I've tried to pass it on too. And it's hard because I want to give back so much. But now that I don't want to say popularity, it's mostly since Instagram has grown and since I've gotten the New York Times bestseller, there's a lot of people who aren't really looking for help as much as they are a quick rise to the top, whatever they think the top is.
Yeah.
You know, and that's hard because I want to give you genuine help and establish a relationship so I can be your support network too. Because that's what makes this fun. Like doing this all by yourself would not be enjoyable. There's nothing better than giving advice to someone or, you know, being a part of their process and then watching them rise higher. That's what's great about teaching is, you know, a lot of people from the outside are like, oh, you deliver lessons and then the kids listen to you and then they learn. But it's like, no, man, like I'm the facilitator of learning. I give material to help facilitate that learning, and I prompt questions, and that's what makes it fun is you get to watch that process happen and then you were a part of it. And one of the benefits of Instagram lately is as a teacher, you rarely get feedback from those kids, especially if they're young. Like, you know, you just don't hear from them again. But with Instagram, I've been getting messages of like, oh, I remember when you helped me with this, or I loved your stories. And if only we could get that as adults more often of the people that you help support. But as far as the original question, like how do I go about picking them? I feel like I've just gotten lucky, truly, in reaching out to individuals that wanted to help me. So, but I also think part of that too is like, you know, your support network could fade if you're not being your genuine self and you're not being selfish. So like the people that have stuck, like I think of my college advisor, she is, I think in her late 80s. She still comes to events. She buys my books. She emails me and we meet for lunch. And I just think like that has been a relationship that I never would have predicted. Never would have predicted. And it's because I've never been trying to take from her constantly. She's been very helpful, but that's not because I'm asking for it. It's just we have a relationship. She wants to help. I, you know, love meeting with her and she's a friend, and it's just it's those types of longevity relationships that you really need to look for. So it's never about like the amount of people. It's just the type of people for sure around you.
Yeah. I'm in full agreement there. In your publishing journey, I picked up in something. This might have been an interview that you had done and I watched, and you had over 200 rejections. And that's when you finally decided to self-publish?
Yeah, so I'll try and condense over a decade into a really short amount of time. So when I was 21, that's when I put all these stories together and called it Matt Sprouts and the Curse of 10 Broken Toes, printed it off, sent my first letter to an agent in New York, and the response time from that varies greatly, but it's usually months before you hear back. And you don't even send your book, you send the idea. And then if they're interested, they might ask for the first 50 pages or 100. And I didn't know any better, but my first rejection was in 2009 when I was 21. And then over the next decade, received hundreds. I kept a spreadsheet of every agent from every agency, the date that I sent the email, the date that I got it back, what the status was. Sometimes you never hear back. Sometimes you hear back and they're not cruel, but they're not kind either. They're like, maybe you should try something else. And, and like, I understand those agents read hundreds of emails a day from people who are all trying to achieve their dreams. So I can't imagine how I would approach that as a literary agent. It would be tough for sure. But the thing that finally kind of pushed me over the edge was, I received what's called a full manuscript read from a literary agent. That's about as good as you can get before they sign you and then try and sell your book to a publisher. And this individual said, send me the book, I'll read it in a week and get back to you. And I was like, oh, this is it. This has got to be it. Like I could feel it, you know? And she goes, I'll get back to you by Saturday. That whole week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, I'm not sleeping at all. My brain is spinning. I'm like projecting what my book cover will look like and the book visits that I'll do, just so enamored with my own dream, right?
Yeah, sure.
And then a week goes by, I don't hear anything. 8 weeks later, I get an email that says, hey, I never read your book. Sorry, I don't think this is for me.
Oh my gosh.
And I was just like, gosh darn it. Like, I believe in my idea so much, and I don't need anyone to tell me my idea is good or not, because I've got students in front of me who are telling me it's good. And they are the trendsetters. They are the ones who decide what will live or not live in terms of movies and entertainment and books. And I was like, I'll just do it myself. But I didn't know how to do that either. And so it was like starting over again, almost. It was like, as I had been for 10 years navigating, sending these letters and the subtleties of how you craft a query letter. And then I entered the world of self-publishing, and I was like, oh, now I'm a small business owner of myself. You know, I have to invest my own money. I have to ask my spouse if she is willing to take a risk of us. And thankfully she was. And that, man, that was a whole, here's what being an independent, I was a small independent business, right? I have a single product, it's a book, but I got a whole new perspective of anyone who starts like a storefront or anything like that. I just high five you all day. You are grinding in a way that I don't think people understand. And I only had a single book and I was trying to push it. I can't imagine having you have an entire business, man. What? I can't imagine. And so navigating that space was difficult, but I learned so much. And I've been asked before, why did you, after 200 rejections, wouldn't you think your product's not good? Why would you continue? And my only answer is I could feel it. That's it.
Yeah.
I could just feel it in my gut and in my soul.
Yeah.
And there were days too. It wasn't like I got rejection letters and then smiled and skipped away. And it's no worries, I'll do it myself. There was days where the one that was 8 weeks later and then she never read my book. I cried I remember crying pretty hard. And that's not to say I did that every time, but it was like, for someone who's chasing a dream, all you want is someone else to see your dream and agree that that's a good idea. So when you talk about support networks, it was so nice to have people like my wife and like my friends who were like, oh no, man, it's going to happen. It's going to happen. And sometimes that's all you need. I don't need a whole party pick me up. I don't need gifts. It's like just a friend saying like, oh, I see it too. That's enough. That's enough to keep you going for a while, I think.
Yeah. That's amazing. What a brutal story there to have a little bit of a carrot and then just crushed after radio silence.
Yes, seriously. And, it's common for authors to go through that process. But I think for me in particular is I had never gotten a full manuscript read. I'd only gotten partial. So that felt like the biggest thing that had happened to me. Like, I was like, this has to be it. But nope.
I had heard a stat that the average author sells no more than 200 books.
I couldn't believe that. I don't know the stats, but I would understand how that could be possible. Yeah,
it kind of blew me away. My entrepreneurial journey started with a book. So Did
it really?
I have a graveyard of LLCs before Kooler finally was the vehicle to go. And my very first one was Life Schools. And I hired the author, I hired the illustrator, and we put together this book of Bully that was about teaching restorative justice principles to middle schoolers. And I don't think I sold 200 books, but I definitely didn't have, there was some kind of feeling, but I just didn't keep pushing. And with what I know now, looking back, I'm like, man, I wish Matt just kept pushing because that thing would be awesome right now.
Well, I was just going to say, like, if you wrote that book a while ago and you were talking about restorative justice, like that's huge right now.
Yeah.
Like that's like a big trend right now is restorative practices. So you were a trendsetter. Maybe you sparked the whole thing.
Maybe.
We just don't know.
Maybe. I feel like, I don't know if you remember was it Family Matters and Joey, and he had like the button down shirt with the ripped off sleeves. That's another trend I claim.
That's another trend you claim. You know what's funny is I also, when my wife met me, most of my closet was t-shirts that I had chopped the sleeves off of. I was a big like, here are my arms. I do lots of bicep curls only. I've got these little chicken legs. That was most of my outfit for sure.
Oh my gosh. All right.
But yeah, man. Selling books, I think, here's what I'll say. Like when I had my independent book and I actually had the product, I thought people would just put me in stores, and even that they wouldn't. And it's just, there are so many different levels to product placements and all that stuff that I've gotten to know. And it's like, sometimes I stop and I'm like, how did I make it here? Like truly, like it's difficult to make it, which is cool when you see like other authors, like the author of the Person Jaxie series, he started his own publishing group for like unrepresented people of color, I think, or unrepresented, I can't even think of the term. Anyways, but he's pushing out all sorts of books just to go find people that haven't had a voice. And it's like, man, that's awesome. Way to like use your platform to like go lift some others up and give them a chance. It's pretty awesome.
Yeah, it is challenging. All right, Matt, 2 final questions for you.
Sure.
The first one's the meaty one. What would you say to a listener or even a student around, what does it mean? How do I want to frame this question? On one level, the question is, what does it mean to tell and share your story?
Oh, not my story, but just like any story.
Yeah, for like an individual. And I think where I go is like, what a bummer to get to that final day, that final breath, and still have some of the story within us.
Man, I need a couple cups of coffee to get through that one.
It's meaty.
Here's what I'll say, and this is kind of my angle for my upcoming book of teaching stories, is I feel like we often tell maybe 5 of the same stories about ourselves, right? When you're like around at a party or a gathering, and you're like, oh, I've got this funny thing from work. this time I had to overcome something, a time I was wronged, an entertainment, whatever it may be. You've got your go-to stories, right? And I certainly have mine. I think people forget that besides your go-to stories, there are all these little things that you do in your life that may have resonated so much more in people. And I think what's tough is how do you hold on to those smaller moments, those real subtle things, Here's an example. Is we were driving one day, and I think I shared this story on Instagram. We were on a road trip, and we have tablets and things to entertain the kids. But one of my daughters was just staring out the window for like an hour, and I had a flashback to when I was a kid, just watching those yellow lines on the road just like zip by until they blur into one. And I just looked at my kid. I'm like, "What are you thinking about?" She goes, "I don't know, Dad, just thinking." And I was like, man, I love that. I love that so much. And although that doesn't really share much about me, that's like the hope for my own kids, is those types of moments. And so when I think of being maybe not my final breath, but I'm coming to a place where I need to start sharing who I am, I would really just start thinking about those really tiny moments that maybe didn't even reach anybody else, but those moments that you share with the closest people around you. That's what I've been thinking about a lot. So when I navigate the space, even in my own house, and what do my kids see of me on a daily basis when I'm not thinking about it? A good example is holding my phone. That's one my wife and I have to keep each other in check of often. I don't want the memory for my kids to be like, "Oh, Dad was on his phone a lot, working on Instagram or recording videos." Like, nah, like I can put my phone away for a day or a week so that we can go outside and skip around. But I just think, taking stock of all the little things you've done and the little stories is important. Yeah.
Oh, I love that, man, because it ties into something early on in this conversation where you were framing how stories can build this context for relating to people. And what I'm hearing, it's these they're super special moments, but they don't need to be anything super grand. It's these moments of presence.
Yeah.
And that can create this context for a relationship that is kind of the essence of life in so many ways.
Let's take that and cut out what I said, because you said it in a much more condensed way. That was that was perfect. That was perfect. But yeah, it really is, at the core about being present, and not waiting for those big things, right? Like, taking a big family vacation, we're going somewhere we never have. Those are great memories. Those shape who you are and how you view the world sometimes. But there are things that happen every single day, man, that are just so special. And I think now that I've never told as many stories as I have in this past year. I've never looked at so many stories this past year. And I feel like I am growing and changing too quite a bit. And that's been fun too.
I love it. Matt, final question. When's the next book coming out, and how do people get attached and connected with you?
Oh, thanks for asking. Well, you can find me basically anywhere. The great thing about having last name Eicheldinger is there's not a lot of us. So if you Google Eicheldinger, I will be most likely the first thing you see. So I've got, my first book is already out in my Matt Sprouts series, and that's called Matt Sprouts and the Curse of the 10 Broken Toes. The sequel of that one comes out in September. And that one's called Matt Sprouts and the Day Nora Ate the Sun. And I'm excited for that one, but I'm excited for this next book called Sticky Notes, Memorable Lessons from Ordinary Moments, because I think that'll be the book that outlives me. I hope. I think that'll be the book that people gift to one another. I think it'll be the book that people read and think of their own interactions on a daily basis. That's my hope. And that book comes out in October. And then I've got 2 more books coming out after that are children's books, one in the Matt Sprouts series and then another standalone. And then after that, who knows? I don't know how long I get to do this. I'm treating it as it's temporary, so that way I enjoy it. Yeah. And I'm trying not to grind away and figure out a way for me to do this forever. really want to enjoy this moment. And I feel like if you do that, sometimes things work out pretty well because then you're your most genuine self.
Yeah. That has radiated throughout this conversation, Matt, and I really appreciate your authenticity and being genuine, and I really appreciate the conversation. We'll be sure to include your different social handles and website and such in our show notes. So listeners who are interested in getting a hold of Matt, please don't hesitate to connect, follow, and reach out. And Matt, thank you again so much for the conversation. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, this was a good one. I could just keep talking with you. This was fun.
Well, we'll follow up and talk to you soon.
All righty.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for listening to the Kooler Lifestyle Podcast. We count on your subscriptions, your likes, your shares, and I encourage you to do that now. If you're watching on YouTube, go ahead and subscribe, lower right-hand button. If you're on audio, download this, share it, and we look forward to having you on the next one.